My name is William Dennis Rippy. Let's stop this a second. Let me get. My name is William Dennis Rippy, and I was attending Elon College my senior year, and in 1942, and I would graduate in 43. I joined the Navy in October 42, and they left me at Elon until I got my degree, at which time I reported to Great Lakes Naval Training Station for my basic training. And following that, I was assigned to the Navy Midshipman School at Abbott Hall in Chicago, Illinois. Upon completion of the school and receiving a commission in the Navy as an ensign, I was ordered to report to North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I took a 3-month course in electrical engineering. And following that, I was sent to Flint, Michigan, where I received a 3-month course in diesel engineering. From there, I was sent to New London, Connecticut to train for submarine duty. But while I was going through the training, they stopped it because the sub that I was being trained to be on, they had not started building it yet. So I was transferred down to Solomon's Island, Maryland, and trained on amphibious forces, LCIs and LSTs. Following that, I reported to Orange, Texas, where we formed a crew, and we picked up a new LCI which was being built there. We went aboard the LCI in Galveston, Texas, and made 2 trips to Guantanamo, the naval basis, with the engineers riding with us to iron out any thing that needed to be done for the ship before we headed to sea. We left Galveston, Texas, went through the Panama Canal to the Pacific area, and from the other side of the canal we left and went out on the Pacific, in the Pacific Theater. We stopped at a fueling island and took on fuel and went from there to New Guinea. And we got into the action in New Guinea by transferring troops from Holland, New Guinea to from Fetchhaven, New Guinea to Holland, New Guinea, and from there to Moatai. And from there we left and went and carried troops for the landing in Leyte when we returned to the Philippine Islands. And from that landing we landed troops initially in Cebu Island, Luzon, and several other small islands in the Philippine area. And from there we left and went to Okinawa and carried reinforcements there. We did not make the original landing. And after Okinawa was pretty well secured, they sent us back to Leyte Gulf, and we were beginning to take on supplies and form a group for the invasion of Japan when the first atomic bomb was dropped, and then later the second. And of course that brought the war to an end. And then we were sent back to Okinawa, and from Okinawa we were sent into Shanghai, China, to be a part of the force that accepted the Jap surrender. Following the surrender, which was signed there, we were sent to Formosa carrying Chiang Kai-shek's troops to Formosa. We made 2 trips doing that. And by that time, I had become commanding officer of LCI Group 4-3 before we went to Shanghai and before we made the landing at Okinawa. I had orders to report to Admiral Barbee's flagship, and I went over to the flagship thinking that we were going to make another trip to Formosa, and he told me we had orders for me. He had orders for me to bring my LCI Group 43 back to San Pedro Bay, California. We left out of Shanghai, China, stopped and took on fuel at a little fueling island, and then came into Pearl Harbor. And at Pearl Harbor, we left some of these ships for they called it the Bikini Atoll test, which they were going to take some of these ships and drop an atomic bomb to see what the effect would be on the ships. And the remaining 6 ships out of the 12, I brought back to San Pedro Bay, California, where they were decommissioned and put into mothballs. And then I returned to Great Lakes Naval Training Station, where I was discharged. Now, while I was out in the Pacific on the LCI 971, we were operating up and down New Guinea. I got transferred over to the staff of LCI Group 43 on 966 as they placed me as the engineering officer for the group. Later, I moved up to the executive officer of the group, especially when we were in the Philippine Islands, making the initial landings around on the different islands in the Philippine Islands. And then when when we went to Formosa, I took command of the group of LCI 43 and remained in command of that group until I brought the group back to the States. I reported back to, after being home on leave for 2 weeks, I had to report back to the Great Lake Naval Training Base, where I was eventually discharged and returned home. In the meantime, I had been accepted to Duke University Medical School, but the Navy would not release me, even though they were sending, Navy had a group that they were sending through med school, but they would not release me to go to med school. So Dean Davison told me I would be in the first class after the war. So when I got out of the Navy, I reported to Duke and talked to Dean Davison, and this was in June, and he told me I'd start to med school in September, which I started in September. Every member of my class, except for one of the females, was a veteran. And out of my class, we only had 3 individuals to drop out, one because of health, and one dropped out because he was having trouble passing certain courses that he needed to pass, and the other one dropped out because he decided he did not want to be a physician. Otherwise, the entire class finished Duke University. I interned on pediatrics at Duke for 6 months, and then I got the internship at Walter Reed Army Hospital, and I particularly wanted that internship because it was what they called a rotating internship. You rotated through the different services. So I reported to Walter Reed Army Hospital, went through the rotating internship there, and while I was there, the general that was in charge of urology, General Kimbrough, offered me the residency in urology, and I told him I wanted to do general practice. And he looked down at me and he says, "You're just like my damn brother." Said I tried to get him to specialize in nothing but he do to go back in the mountains of North Carolina and do general practice, and said he went back in the mountains of North Carolina and died young as a pauper. But when I left Walter Reed, I went to Fort Bragg for about 8 months, and then I got orders to go to Raleigh, North Carolina. In the morning I was reporting in, and the general told me he had order orders for me to report to Raleigh, North Carolina. And I said, well, what in the world's in Raleigh? He said, I don't know, but you got orders to go to Raleigh. So I went to Raleigh, and in the meantime, an officer from the Quartermaster Corps came over and met me. And we went to Raleigh, and I had orders to go to Raleigh and pick out a suitable building and set up an examining station in Raleigh for the draftees. They were all going to Fort Bragg before that. So we went and found a nice building that had been a car dealership. And the engineers came up and developed it and laid it off like we wanted it laid off to make an examining station out of it. So I opened that examining station in Raleigh, and we started receiving all the draftees from east of Raleigh through that examining station. They sent the crew for giving the different tests and everything. And after being at the examining station for about 2 months, I had a call from the General of the 3rd Army in Atlanta, Georgia. And he said, Rippy, he said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm doing fine. And he said, well, I told him that you'd make a good fellow to set up the examining station in Raleigh. And I found out why I got the orders to go to Raleigh to set up the examining station. And it happened to be that this particular general, I had him as a patient when we operated on him at Walter Reed for a kidney stone. So I set up the examining station and stayed there until I was discharged from service. And then that's when I came back to Burlington. And then started to medical school started my medical practice in Burlington on July the 1st of the year that I got out of service on June the 30th. That was in 1952. And
Dr. Rippy, what would you say is the major thing you learned, the thing that you really carried with you and have carried with you through life from your military career?
I think that the major thing that I learned and carried it the rest of the way through my life was that when you assign a duty to do, that you did it fully and wholeheartedly, because somebody else was doing a duty that protected you also. And I found out that in life, when you did something that you were supposed to do, that you did it to the full extent. Postscript, as about a week outside of coming into Pearl Harbor, I sent a message into the, we had what was called the senior officer afloat, who was whoever was a senior officer in the Bay. You always had to correspond to him. I sent a message that I was expecting to arrive at Pearl Harbor at a certain time. I resent the message about 24 hours out and requested a pilot. And we arrived there and there was no pilot waiting to take us in. I tried to race somebody by light, by flag, and by radio, and nobody answered. And about that time a sub had surfaced and came alongside, and the commanding officer on the sub wanted to know if I had a pilot aboard, and I told him no sir I didn't, and I had requested one. He said he had requested one also. Well, he tried and couldn't raise anybody, and so he called up and said he'd been in there before and said he was going in. I said, well, I'll follow you. So we went down through the channel to get into the bay, and I followed the sub in, and I went over and dropped anchor, and that's the first time that I had a reply from anybody. And I thought, well, no wonder the Japs got in here, because this was right at the end of the war, and there's nobody active receiving people coming in. And I had orders that I had to move out of the place I was anchored because of the aircraft carrier anchorage. So they told me where to move. Well, you have to go in and report whenever you come into a bay to the senior officer president in the bay's office. So I went in to report, and I told him that Lieutenant Rippy was reporting LCI Group 4-3, and we'd just come in. And he looked at the book, and he looked at me and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I called in and sent a message in requesting a pilot, and I did not receive one." He said, "When did you send the message?" And I told him, and he looked and he said, "Well, you did, didn't you?" And then I thought, well, gosh knows, this soon, right after the war being over, they got so relaxed they don't even know who's coming into the bay here now. And Helen wanted me to tell about, we got this black boy in the examining station in Raleigh that could not read or write. And he was from the eastern part of the state. And we had an exam that would give people that could not read or write. And this black boy took that exam and made 100. We had nobody else to make 100 on it. He made 100 on it. And so the Air Force recruiter was there, and he said, "Damn," said, "we'll take him, we'll teach him to read and write." And we decided to give this non-language test to other people just to see how they would do. And we gave this test that this fellow made 100 on to people that had graduated from college that was coming in, and didn't any of them ever make 100 on it. And the test was one of those tests of using your ability to choose the difference between certain things or line up certain things. And I've often wondered whatever happened to that young black fella that couldn't read or write, that made 100 on the non-language test that we gave to other people after that to see what they would do. And nobody else that we gave it to made 100. And let's see, was there anything else you want to... I think that's about it.
I think that covered it. And Dr. Rippy, cannot tell you how much I appreciate what you've done here today. And thank you very much for your service.
Well, I appreciate you doing it.
Glad to do it.
Appreciate you doing it.